Wonderful. Right, good morning everybody and a warm welcome to the penultimate presentation in Plantlife's 2022 Spring into Action webinar series. My name is Beth Newman. I'm the GIS and Biological Data Manager at Plantlife, and I'm going to be introducing our topic for today, which is data-driven conservation at Plantlife. In essence, how we utilise multiple types of data and analyse it with emerging technologies to provide extra insight with which we can carry out focused conservation work on the ground. And it ultimately means that we're more successful in our delivery. As this is an enormous subject matter and time is relatively short, we will be focusing on three key areas of Plantlife's work. I will be talking about habitat and species mapping in a project currently taking place in southwest England. And I'm going to be joined later by my colleague Mary Grace Rowe, the Biological Data and GIS Officer at Plantlife. She will be talking about the emergence of app technology and how we're using it to mobilise a huge amount of citizen science people to collect good quality data from our survey projects. And last but not least, I will be joined by Oliver Wilson, Plantlife's Npms ecological modeller, and he will be using National Plant Monitoring Scheme data to evaluate the impacts of climate change on UK plant communities. Ollie, Mary Grace and myself all sit in the evidence team at Plantlife, and I think I can talk for everyone here when we say we're passionate about how access to good quality data, when analysed with the correct tools, is instrumental in making a difference to the way we approach conservation activity, and will ultimately determine how successful that conservation is in line with our conservation ambitions. So, a little bit of housekeeping before we start. This presentation is being recorded and it will be made available after the event next week sometime on Plantlife's YouTube channel, together with some of the other presentations that have made up part of this webinar series in the last month. And there are multiple other Plantlife videos available for you to look at your leisure and share widely, please. There will also be the opportunity to ask questions, and we're going to have a session at the end of our presentations to get to some of those questions. So please drop those in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom screen as we go along, and I'll pick up at the end of the session and I will direct them to whoever the relevant staff member is. Okay, so let's get started. I will be focusing today on a partnership. Apologies, it would help if I shared my screen, wouldn't it? Okay. So I will be focusing today on a partnership project called Building Resilience in Southwest Woodlands, and it's been running for the last 5 years. Temperate rainforests, and it's based around this habitat type, temperate rainforest, which are one of Britain and Ireland's most important habitats. They're considered globally rare and are found on Britain's mild, damp Atlantic coastline. And Britain has a lot of mild, damp Atlantic coastline. If we put it into the global context, we can see that we actually hold a lot of this resource. And so it is important that we recognise that and conserve it appropriately. So why is this habitat important? It's important for many reasons, not least the fact that it supports a globally significant diversity of lichens and bryophyte species that themselves are a substantial habitat and food source. They have a role in nutrient and water cycling. They are important environmental indicators and play a key role in biomedical research. And unfortunately, as with all globally rare habitats, or at least most, they are under threat. They're under threat from things like habitat fragmentation, change in management, invasive species, and increasingly ash dieback and climate change. And so with this in mind, a building resilience project was set up by Plantlife, designed by Plantlife and our partner organisations. And it was focused largely in Devon and Cornwall, with some areas of West Somerset included, and was designed to work closely with woodland owners, farmers and local communities to explore ways in which these woodlands can be made more resilient to change, better understood and fully celebrated as part of the region's natural heritage. Funded through the Heritage Lottery Fund, and with all of those partners listed below, the project aims to conserve the region's temperate rainforest and its important lichen and bryophyte communities through emergency conservation management and innovative approaches, whilst equipping a wide range of project partners, organisations and communities with new skills to interpret, identify, record and conserve important lower plant populations. I should say at this point that I'm only focusing on one strand of the Building Resilience project. Then on multiple other strands, I'm going to be focusing on the citizen science aspect and how we use data to model areas so that we could actually direct the most impact from that citizen science survey on the ground. So lofty ambitions, but how do you get started in such a project? One key aspect to start with is, do we know where the temperate rainforests actually are? And before this project started, there was no one resource where we could confidently indicate where those woodland parcels sat within the geography of the southwest England. And so with our partner, the Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, we started to pull together woodland spatial layers and collate them in one layer, which we thought were relevant to this habitat type. And we took parcels from the SSSI layer, County Wildlife Sites layer, the other wildlife sites layer, and UK BAP habitat spatial layers. And we analysed the attributes that sit underneath that information. And if they mentioned ancient woodland, lichens and bryophytes populations, and woodland specifically, then they were pulled through into this GIS layer. Some of the areas that were pulled through were mosaics, and they were mosaics of both woodland and grassland. And of course, that was not particularly relevant to our project. And so we clipped it against the National Forestry Inventory to remove those grassland sites. So a good place to start. We now have a spatial layer of woodland we think is appropriate to look at in more detail. But where do we think the lichen and bryophyte rich assemblages fall? In 2007, Plantlife identified 165 important plant areas across the UK. These covered all botanical taxonomic groups, including lichens and bryophytes, vascular plants or flowering plants, together with other things such as stoneworts, desmids, and those kind of features. And so we already had an idea in the southwest where the lichen and bryophyte areas of interest are. But bear in mind, this was identified by our partners, the British Lichen Society and the British Bryological Society in 2007. And so whilst we think this is still good information, we wanted to ensure that we're using up-to-date information to focus attention. At this point, I should say that Plantlife ourselves are not large data collecting organisations. Sorry, it's not a large data collecting organisation for UK distribution data. We certainly collect information from our projects, but they are more localised in focus. And so by working with the people that know the best information, it's very useful because we then have access to such a valuable resource in terms of their databases that they hold. So our friends at the British Lichen Society hold the threatened lichen dataset, and our friends at the British Biological Society hold the threatened bryophyte dataset. And within those datasets, we pulled in information of 118 indicator lichen species records and 16 bryophyte records, which were indicators for temperate rainforests. And we pulled in data from the last 20 years as being a snapshot of where the survey effort has been occurring over time. And superficially, the distribution looks like this. And you can see that there are large parcels of species records everywhere. But bear in mind, we're trying to focus our attention on the key areas. And so really what we needed to do is do a little bit of hotspot mapping to show where the real heat was attached to the assemblage density of those indicator species records. So this is a lichen and bryophyte geographically weighted mean analysis, which starts to focus attention more in those areas of interest for this habitat type. And remember the important plant area layer. There is a correlation here, as you can see. And so we think we're in the right position. We also know that climate data is particularly interesting and useful when doing this kind of analysis. Excuse me, I'm looking at my notes. Environmental factors such as rainfall, humidity, and temperature will affect lichen and bryophyte distribution. And so we mapped monthly gridded data sets at a 5 by 5 km level resolution from the Met Office. And this is just one example of that with the rain hotspots. And we effectively then analysed it by using linear regression analysis against the lichen and bryophyte species dataset layer to see whether there is any correlation between those environmental parameters and the species layer. And the analysis shows that for bryophytes, the rainfall layer, which is the example given here, had a good correlation, a significant correlation with richness, and therefore was a good predictor of the regions that we should be looking at. And for lichens, both humidity and rainfall had a significant correlation. And so again, it all adds evidence to the areas we should be looking at. So it's a lot of information. What do we actually do with it? How do we make it relevant to a conservation ambition on the ground? Remember this slide? I haven't just duplicated it. This is the species data set for the lichen and bryophytes indicator species. And what we did is we took this and we compared it with the woodland parcels taken from what we think is the correct temperate woodland areas, and analysed it together to come up with a traffic light modelling scheme, colour scheme. And this map shows, I apologise, it's not incredibly clear, but it shows where there is overlap with species records. They are indicated green on these maps. Where the resolution of the grid reference of the species record was not particularly high, but we think it's relevant to the woodland parcel, it falls within a close proximity to the woodland parcel boundary. We coloured those amber. And where there was no information or no records that overlapped, we coloured those red. And so this is very indicative of the fact that actually we don't know very much about those red woodland areas. It's not necessarily that they're not relevant. It probably is more representative of the fact that there hasn't been any lichen and bryophyte surveys occurring in those areas in the last 20 years, and therefore the data hasn't been included within our data sets. And as we know, analyses is only as good as the data that goes into it. And so a close-up of this map round the Bovey Valley area down in southern Dartmoor shows a little bit more of the detail of the type of information that we're actually pulling together. It shows that the important plant area, signified by the blue line, is actually a really good indicator of the key core interest for woodland lichens and bryophytes. However, I'm also particularly interested in the yellow and the red parcels that sit around the perimeter of that woodland. And I want to know more about, are they relevant to the cause, or do they have incorrect management at this point in time, which means that they do not support lichens and bryophytes. And so it gives us an area of interest to focus on. So what do we do with that? We mobilise people in the area. And this is a key factor of this project. It's based on citizen science information that's going to be collected throughout the project's term. We asked communities, woodland owners, anybody that had interest to take part in a rapid woodland assessment. This rapid woodland assessment can be carried out as part of your daily woodland walk. It takes 1 to 2 hours, and it's a quick and simple way of indicating the condition of the woodland that you're walking through. And these woodlands can be accessed by publicly accessible footpaths or by approaching the landowner to ask permission. And so this is really vital information for us to know more about those woodlands that we don't know much about at this point in time. It collects information about lichen and bryophyte species that can be found there. It also collects information about the type of management that might be taking place, or whether there are any site-specific threats that we could effectively monitor and go back to the landowner and advise correct management about. And so this is our data flow model that is attached to mobilising citizen scientists in the field. We worked closely by providing volunteers with maps based on the analysis that I've shown you today. We directed them to woodlands in their areas which fell within those areas which were of most interest to the project and deliverables. And we used this information to go back to woodland owners and to start a discussion based on the type of management that's needed to improve the health of those regions. And then I mentioned earlier that there are a couple of other strands to this project. At the same time that all of this was happening, the Lichen Society were training new generation botanists to identify lichen species in the field. So this is introducing a whole new level of expertise in the region with the support of BLS over time to actually get people that were not lichen experts to start to be able to identify species of interest that can add to our knowledge base. And so we're almost up to date. This is a snapshot of where the rapid woodland assessments have taken place in the last 3 years. There are 300 sites we now know more information about. And I drew this map 2 weeks ago. So we're really at an exciting place in this project term. And we're currently data crunching to see the findings of what the survey is showing, and also to then put into place the legacy of the project, which will involve handing this information back to the partners in these regions that are either landowners or integrally involved with communities present, to better ensure that future management is correct. And also there is an increased ambition to monitor much more of those extra woodlands moving forward, so that we continue to bring in key information from these sites. All of the lichen and bryophyte data that's collected through the project term is sent back to the British Biological Society and the British Lichen Society. And again, it all adds to the information that is available and is out there. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm going to hand over to my colleague now, Mary Grace Rowe, who's going to talk a little bit about citizen science and app work that we do at Plantlife.
All right, let me share my screen. Well, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Beth, for the introduction. My name, again, is Mary Grace, and I'm the Data and GIS Officer at Plantlife, and I'll be highlighting how we're using technology as a tool for citizen science or crowdsourced data collection. So just to start, I wanted to talk briefly about what citizen science is. Is it something all three of us will be talking about? So there's many different definitions of citizen science, but more or less, citizen science is public participation and collaboration in scientific research. So through citizen science, people, not necessarily with a scientific background, can share and contribute to data monitoring and collection programs. And so citizen science is valuable for several reasons. Sufficient funds may not always be available to support large-scale data collection over a long period of time. So having committed volunteers and citizen scientists can help make a project more resilient and more robust. Giving people access to hands-on data collection means people are engaging with their local environment, learning about environmental issues, and giving them the experience they need to be an advocate for conservation. And as well, it can enhance health and well-being, being outdoors and engaging with the natural world. As well, with the advent of technological advances that make collecting and submitting data very straightforward, citizen science projects are more accessible and can provide high quality data. And citizen science can also permit the detection of rare events that may not otherwise be easily detected. So having more people out with a trained eye looking for something can really expand the reach of a project with it. It's just very, very valuable. So Plantlife are involved in several citizen science campaigns with various partners. The cowslip survey is being launched again this spring for its second survey season. This survey involves looking at cowslip flowers and determining whether it is one of two types, an L morph or an S morph, which you can determine by just looking at the flower. And the ratio of the two types will give an indication of the health of the underlying grassland. And this survey contributes to a study that's being led by the University of Tartu in Estonia and the Estonian Fund for Nature to develop a pan-European understanding of the health of our grasslands. The Waxcap Watch is one that I will be discussing a bit later, and I also won't say too much about the National Plant Monitoring Scheme, as my colleague Ollie will be giving an overview of that a bit later as well. The Cairngorm's Rare Plants and Wild Connections projects has several citizen science opportunities wrapped up in it, one of which is the opportunity to go out with a staff member from our Scotland team on targeted translocation of a couple of rare pine wood plants, including twin flower and one flowered wintergreen. And then the rapid woodland assessment is one that Beth's already discussed, which is part of the Building Resilience Project. And some of these are out-of-the-box surveys that can be done with little to no prior knowledge needed. They're designed to walk you through exactly what information you need to gather as you go. And some of the projects may require a bit of training ahead of time or a bit of familiarizing yourself with survey methodology before you go out and take part in the survey. But in any case, you don't have to be an expert botanist or mycologist to participate. And I think that's one of the brilliant things about citizen science. And the information that these projects are collecting can be used for things like targeting species recovery programs where they're most needed, directing conservation efforts, and engaging with landowners to offer specific advice, which will result in habitats being protected. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Waxcap Watch survey before I talk about the tech that sits behind it. So waxcaps belong to a group of mushrooms known for their waxy and shiny cups. They come in a variety of vibrant colors, and there are around 50 different species in the UK, and together with other types of fungi, including pink gills and earth tongues, which are in that center photo, as well as club and coral fungi, they form an assemblage called waxcap grassland fungi. Waxcap grasslands are typically land which has received no artificial fertilizers, are low in nutrients, and haven't been plowed for over periods of decades. Because of this, waxcaps can be a good indicator of rare species-rich grassland. And knowing where waxcaps are thriving can help us to pinpoint where fragments of old meadows and pastures are still around. And it's not just, or species-rich grasslands aren't just important for the wildflowers that are there, but they're also important for the fight against climate change. Species-rich grasslands can store up to a third more carbon than grasslands with just a handful of species. And the UK is home to some of the most important waxcap grasslands in the world, with Wales and Scotland supporting over half of all waxcap fungi in the UK. However, some of these species are in decline. They're very sensitive to change in the environment, and they can't tolerate a lot of disturbance, which is why some of the most diverse fungi grasslands can be found in graveyards and old pastures and upland and lowland hay meadows. So back in 2020, Plantlife launched the first Waxcap Watch survey season, which runs from late summer to early winter. It was originally launched as part of a campaign in Wales, but had such great uptake in England and Scotland that this past survey season, it was formally opened up to the whole UK. It's designed for the non-specialist as a way to report occurrences of waxcap grassland fungi and provide details of the habitat where they're found. And at Plantlife, we use a geospatial software called ArcGIS for creating maps and analyzing geographic data. And to design this survey, we used an ArcGIS product called Survey 123, which allows us to create smart forms in-house. And because we use this integrated software, the results from the survey are then immediately available within the ArcGIS platform, and therefore immediately ready for analysis and for creating products like interactive maps. Additionally, Survey 123 can be accessed on a PC or a smart device, either through the Survey 123 app, which is free, or through a web browser. This is a brilliant feature, especially in the context of citizen science, because there are multiple ways to access the survey. And if you're using the Survey 123 app, you have the additional functionality of being able to complete a survey offline, which is really great when you're out surveying remote areas and you don't have access to mobile data. Survey 123 also allows for surveys to be available in multiple languages. And because the forms are so customizable, they can be designed in a really user-friendly way. And so I'll do a quick demo of what the app looks like. So this is how the app would appear on a smart device, on a smartphone in this case. We've divided it up into 5 pages just so you're not endlessly scrolling through questions. This first page is just an introduction to the survey, what it's all about. Down here at the bottom, there's links to the website and the Waxcap Facebook group, and instructions on how to view the survey in Welsh, which if you click in the upper right-hand corner and click Welsh, you'll then be able to see the Welsh translated version of the survey, which is very handy. So, but I'll switch back to English for today. The second page is just asking details about you, just in case we need to get back in touch with you about anything you found in your survey. This third page is getting to know the area you're in. So asking questions about the habitat type or the land use wherever you are. If we scroll down a bit, there's also a map with a point. So if you have the GPS enabled on your smart device, the survey should be able to drop a pin where you are. If you are completing this on a PC, you can, obviously you can click the map and then you can drag the pin to where you conducted your survey. Another neat functionality of Survey 123 is the ability to have dependent questions. And I'll show you an example. So in this question of whether you're surveying private or public land, if you select public, you get a question asking about who manages the land. Whereas if you select private, it asks if it's your own land and if you have permission to survey the land. So that's really great to just kind of keep the survey clean and that people aren't seeing questions that aren't relevant to them as they go through the survey. Then there's moves on to questions about vegetation cover in the area, grazing, whether the site's mown, and then there's the opportunity at the end to upload photos of the site. This next page is where you get to tell us about the wax caps that you found on your site. And again, so this is a non-specialist survey, so we're not asking for species-specific information. We've categorized the wax caps by color. However, there are two categories that will get more at the species-specific identification, one of them being this pink ballerina wax cap. So if you click yes that you've seen this wax cap, you'll get a pop-up box that explains that these wax caps are regarded as important indicators of rich grassland fungus habitat and will ask you to upload a picture so that your identification can be confirmed. So if you keep scrolling down, there are the rest of the wax cap grasslands, and then you'll come to the next category, which is other grassland fungi. And violet coral is another one where if you select yes, you will be asked to upload a picture to confirm the identification. So if you scroll down to the very bottom, after you finish telling us about what fungi you've seen, you'll receive a score and a little paragraph explaining what that score means for that site. And then the last page is a feedback page, and then you can submit your survey. And this slide's just showing the different scoring values that are associated with each of those different colors. The species that are associated with higher point values are rarer species. So a site score of 0 to 4 would indicate a low scoring site. A score of 5 to 11 would be a moderate site, and then a score of 12 to 29 would be a high scoring site. And I will now take you to the WaxCap Watch live results. We have a live map where the results are coming in. So I will pull that up on my screen. So this map is available on our website for you to check out if you'd like. So this has the survey results from last year and this year on it. If you go over here, you can turn the layers on and off if you just want to look at one year's worth of survey data. Also, you can go over here to the legend and again see that the different surveys are categorized by the score they received, and the different shapes of the points are showing the 2 different years that the survey was conducted. And so you'll see on the left-hand panel, there's you can see previews of the photos that people have uploaded, and I'll click on one to show you an example. So if you click on one of the records, you can see the site score, the month and year that it was collected, and then a little bit of information about the site, as well as the waxcap and grassland fungi that were found on the site. And you'll also be able to flip through the pictures that were uploaded. And I'll show you some of these pictures with this survey. The site obviously has identified waxcap fungi as well as the violet coral, which is very exciting. And so the 2020-2021 survey season, we had 390 surveys submitted, and this most recent survey season, we had 570. So that's very exciting. And with that, I will move on to talk about the results. So what are we going to do now with this 2 years worth of records that we've had submitted, and what's next? So several things. We will use these survey results to identify previously unknown waxcap grassland sites across the UK, which can potentially add value to the important fungi area network. From these surveys, we'll be able to get an indication rather of habitat condition at each site to aid more informed conversations with landowners and land managers. We'll also be able to help build a case to policymakers for better protection of waxcap grasslands. In Wales, we'll look to share new findings with Natural Resources Wales, fungus groups, and other experts to investigate especially those high scoring sites. And in Scotland, the results from the survey will inform conversations with landowners on how to best restore and protect local waxcap grasslands in key project areas, including the Cairngorms National Park. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand it over to my colleague, Ollie Wilson, to talk to you about the National Plant Monitoring Scheme. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary Grace. I will, as Mary Grace suggests, just share my screen. That one. And hopefully you can see that now. So I'm going to be talking to you today about one of Plantlife's other citizen science schemes that Mary Grace mentioned, the National Plants Monitoring Scheme, and how it interfaces with one of the biggest challenges facing the natural world and indeed everything on the planet, which is climate change. Now, hopefully it won't be news to you that Earth's climate is changing, and that is having impacts here in the UK as well. Often that's represented through squiggly lines like the ones on the left, which do show that our climate has got warmer by a degree or more since the late 19th century. But to try and put to give an impression of just how enormous the magnitude of these changes is, it's helpful to think in a long-term perspective. That's what I've done lots of my research on. But we've moved in the last century or so a considerable fraction of an ice age worth of warming. There's about 4.5 degrees between recent modern conditions and the conditions of the last ice age. And if we are not careful and we don't put in major safeguards and rein in our carbon emissions, there is a realistic possibility that by the end of this current century, we could have moved a full ice age unit the other way. In reality, it's very unlikely we're going to get quite that far, but even if we manage to constrict things to half an ice age unit, which at the moment is looking roughly likely, we're going to see enormous changes. Now, the UK has got excellent data on its climate. You'll see here that these squiggly lines show the changes back to the late 19th century, which for much of the world is unprecedented, but the UK can go even further. And we can see the changes in the UK climate all the way back to the mid 17th century. And that is, I think, without any parallel in the world. Similarly, the UK has got excellent data on its biodiversity. Now that's important because with these changing climatic conditions, we know we're going to see impacts on our natural world, and we need to be able to understand how different species and the habitats we have custody over are changing. Now, the UK, as I say, has got some fantastic ecological monitoring schemes, and in many, many cases, for many of these taxa, they have been in place for decades, delivering really important, useful information on how different groups are faring. However, one of the things which for a plant conservation charity is a little bit troubling is that plants have been relatively neglected in this. The only scheme that has been gathering data on the abundance of UK plants in habitats has been the Countryside Survey. Now that started way back in 1978. There's only been half a dozen collection periods until the last couple of years when they moved into a rolling system. And so it makes it difficult to see year to year and season to season how the UK's plants are changing. And in that context comes the National Plants Monitoring Scheme, Npms. It was set up it was launched in 2015 after a number of years of consultation and planning and refinement, and it's a partnership scheme. It's run with the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, with the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, with DARA department in the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, with the UK's Joint Nature Conservation Committee, and with us here at Plantlife. It's a partnership citizen science scheme, and it's designed to give us a kind of sentinel network to see what is happening to the UK's habitats through their plant communities. We've got 11 broad habitats, each of them broken down into finer examples. We've got some 30 or so indicator species for each of those habitats. And by sending volunteers out to go and survey those squares and plots within this carefully selected network, we should get a statistically robust view of what is happening to plants in the UK's habitats. We've got slightly over half of the squares that are available have been allocated to volunteers. We still have quite a few, the blue in that map, that are available. If you're looking on that map and you think, oh, that's near me, or I go on holiday there, please go check out the NPMS website, npms.org.uk, and see if you could sign up for that. We have people participating at 3 different levels to cover a whole range of abilities, from wildflower level, where we have some of the most important and easiest to identify flowers, through to indicator level, where we look at these plants which show us key things about the trajectory of the habitat health. And then right at the top, if you're a confident, competent botanist, you can take part at inventory level, when you identify and estimate the coverage of every plant in your plots. We have got hundreds of these 1 kilometre squares and have provided this data over the last 7 years. And we're starting now, my job, to try and make sense of it. So volunteers have been going out since 2015 and recording, either on paper or on our snazzy new app, what they are finding, how much of their squares and their plots does each species cover. And that data has now all been made freely available on the UK's Environmental Information Data Centre, the EIDC, which is held by the UK CEH. And from my point of view, this data set is where the magic starts to happen. So we know the UK's climate is changing, but it's changing very fast, and not just in the future. The climate changes have happened over the last century, or even slightly more. So you can see from these maps, each colour represents a distinct type of climate. They don't have formal definitions as such, but by looking at places you can imagine, you can see what the climate is like now, what it was like before, and what it will be like in the next 20 years. So, for example, the current climates in the south of England didn't exist anywhere in the UK between 1901 and 1930. But in the next 20 years or so, they will probably cover an area that covers a line from Devon to Doncaster and beyond. Climate conditions that were found in the early 20th century in Cornwall are now found across Wales, much of the northwest of England, quite a large part of Northern Ireland, up into the western coast of Scotland. And some climate conditions, which used to be very common, you've got dark blues here and some of these greens, are going to start disappearing. And what's more, places like Cornwall and South and Western Wales, in the next 20 years, are likely to have climate conditions, this kind of brown colour you see here, unlike anything we have known before, at least in the last 120, 150 years. This is worrying. So one of the first pieces of research I've been doing is to look and see how these climate changes interact with the UK's land cover, with the habitats that we have. If you overlap the maps of climate change through time, which you can see are accelerating drastically as we look further and further into the future, we see some things like this. Now, this data, these findings are preliminary, they need updating, and they're likely to change before they get peer reviewed. So don't hang too much weight on them at the moment. But what we do see is several interesting patterns. We see that historic climate change from about 1901 through to 2019, is vastly smaller than the climate changes expected to happen over the next 20 years, when we can be fairly confident of the trajectory we will see, and especially dwarfed by the changes we might see, if we're not careful, between 2061 to 2080. You can see here the hotter colours in this map, we're likely to see very significant changes to our climate if we cannot rein in our emissions by then. We also see interesting things where very significantly human-altered habitats rank very highly in the ones that are most exposed to both historic and future climate changes. We have arable and horticultural lands, suburban and urban areas, all rank among the most exposed land cover types in the UK. We can also see that some of the UK's grasslands, including one of our most special habitats, calcareous grassland, rank among the very highest exposed habitat classes in the UK. Now, that is useful to know because that might help us to think about changes we would expect to see in the future and the changes that it might help us explain changes we are seeing at the present. But one of the things I'm going to be looking at next week when I get back to work is to see how well the UK's ecological monitoring schemes can capture these gradients of climate change. The hope and expectation is that the Npms, like the Countryside Survey, will do a very good job of sampling habitat types across this gradient, because we need to figure out if, as in this little map here with the coloured dots, schemes like the ecological or the long-term monitoring network, for example, are they capturing, say, the most exposed areas of broadleaf woodland or the least exposed bit of bog habitat? If that's the case, that will affect the magnitude of the changes we are seeing, and it will affect how well we can understand how the UK's habitats and plant communities are responding to climate changes. Now, I will soon be looking at how the Npms compares to that, and we'll be moving this piece of research through to peer review. But the next piece of research is going to be even more important, and it's exemplified by this study, which was carried out on a similar survey called Vigiflor in France. There, the authors looked to see how the composition of the French habitats in this survey was changing through time. They started in 2019, they analysed up till 2017, and they looked to see how the mean thermal preference, how warm or cold did the plants in each community like their habitats. They looked to see how that thermal preference was changing through time. And they found, even in those 8 years of a survey, a significant change towards more warm adapted plant communities. Those changes were especially marked when you looked at annual plant communities as opposed to all plant communities or just perennial ones. You can see the difference up here. And they also noticed that areas which had experienced a greater temperature change through time, ones which were warming faster, had, as you might expect, the greatest trend towards increased thermal preference in their communities. Essentially, areas which are exposed the most to climate change have seen the greatest warming. The plan is for the Npms data we have to feed into a study like this, linked in with the exposure data we have on UK habitat and climate change, to get a better understanding on where places are changing, how they are changing, and how they may change in the future. So in this way, the volunteer citizen science data that Npms has been collecting is going to help us drive and plan for conservation across the UK in the future. Now, on that note, I'm going to hand back over to Beth, and she is going to wrap up and lead us into a period of Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Ollie. A lot of challenges there. And thank you also to Mary Grace, who was talking about the wax cap survey. It's very interesting as well. Ollie, can you stop sharing your screen? Brilliant. And I'm going to welcome everybody back. Thank you very much, because we've had a few questions in, which we can talk about now. And I think a good place to start would probably be the ones that are directed at you, Ollie, seeing as they're fresh in our mind. And we've been asked, how are you defining exposure?
Good question. So the decision to use the term exposure in this is because how habitats and plants are affected by climate change is a function of both their exposure to climate change, how much their climate conditions have changed, and their ability to respond to that. So there's a component of resilience which complicates this very direct measurement of how much climate change has happened. On a very technical level, I've been using a technique called PCA to kind of take quite a lot of, I can't remember, I think it's 30 odd climate variables, reduce them down to the general axes of variation, so you kind of get warm and dry against cold and wet, and you get summer wet against summer dry kind of conditions, and seeing how far each pixel on a map is moving along those axes. So essentially, fundamentally, exposure to climate change, as far as I'm using the definition, is how great has been the change in conditions between time points in the 20th and 21st century.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And just an extra simple one for you, I believe, is French study biology letters free access?
I'm just looking to see.
We know that.
I don't know off the top of my head. The digital object identifier, the DOI, was on that slide, and it's called Short-Term Climate-Induced Change in French Plant Communities. If you look that up, you should be able to find it. If you can't find it, then you could always email the authors, or at a pinch, email one of us, because I can access the PDF and it's no problem to share that. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, that's great. And one for Mary Grace now. Can the app be used retrospectively to enter data after the season? So that's to do with the wax cap survey app,
Yes.
I think.
So we do close the survey for the season. I believe we'll be closing it at the end of this month, just because the fruiting season for wax caps is now over. I would encourage you, if you have a survey that you've not yet submitted and you go to submit it and you find the survey's closed, to just get in touch with us via the conservation inquiries email, and we can figure out how to make sure your survey is included, whether we have to manually enter the survey information ourselves. That wouldn't be a big problem, but that's what I would say.
Okay, wonderful. And I'm going to take the next one that was asked as part of my presentation. And it says, is it important for members of the public to record lichen and bryophytes with apps like iRecord? And that's actually a wide subject, and iRecord is a fantastic open access portal where you can effectively have an app from the lichen and biological societies on your smart device. You can go out into the field, you can collect the relevant fields of interesting information that need to support a lichen and bryophyte record, and then it goes through to this online portal, which and then is used for future conservation. So what I would say is absolutely, it's incredibly important to record information. It's also incredibly important to mobilize data. And so by collecting it in a digital way, it means that much larger percentages of the population actually have access to it for use in such projects that we're looking at now. One great thing about iRecord as well is that it has verifiers that come on. So members of the BLS and the BBS will have signed up to be verifiers, and they can actually go into the record. And if a picture is submitted, they can verify that that is the species that has actually been recorded. And it's a really good way of, of just talking about kind of that wealth of information, checking that we're collecting the right stuff, and actually having it accessible to much larger data sets, which then use it for project planning or distribution mapping and seeing how things change over time, which is so key to all of the areas of the work that we've talked about today. So I would very much encourage it, yes. And you can capture any information if you want through iRecord. It doesn't have to be lichens and bryophytes, it can be any biological species, so animals, plants, whatever you like. So yes, I would encourage that. And somebody has also asked about what citizen science projects are going to be available this year to take part in. And we have a few on our radar at the moment that we are going to be launching soon. The cowslip survey is going to be launched soon. Mary Grace, I can't remember the timescale of that one. I
believe that one's going to be in April.
Okay, in April. One thing I should say is please do consider signing up to Plantlife's e-bulletin. It's a newsletter that effectively can update you on all of this survey work, all of the campaigns that you can get involved with, and really gives kind of you access to us in terms of how you can kind of really assist with this important work that's being carried out. And yes, and so we have the cowslip survey. We also have Npms, and we saw that there were, I can't remember the exact percentage, but something like 42% of squares are still to be taken. And so please do have a look at the Npms website, see if there's one in your area that you might be able to take on. We would love your data if you want to collect it. And also, we're going to be running a very important campaign called No Mow May, where we encourage you to effectively do nothing during May in terms of your gardens. We encourage you to leave that mower in your shed and to just see what actually springs up naturally in your lawn. That is then followed by the Every Flower Counts survey. So you can see what's come up in May, and in June, you can count it all, send us the information, and we can start to really see what nectar score can be generated to support our invertebrate life through just leaving your garden alone and having a wild area and the benefits that that actually brings with it. And as I say, there will be various different surveys throughout the year, depending on seasonality generally, that you can get involved in. So please do consider that. That would be wonderful if you could join us in that way. One thing that is quite exciting as well is that we are coming into a term where we're going to have a new project about digital volunteering. And it's being launched in April, May time during Plantlife. And it's an opportunity, if you have some spare time and you're interested in technology or other factors and want to do a little bit of volunteering and to support the work that we do, you can sign up to specific projects and assist us in that way. So please do look out for that kind of in our literature. I can't really talk very much about it because it hasn't started yet, but have it on your radar if that's something that might interest you. Okay, well, I think I can really draw us to a close. Hopefully you enjoyed the discussion today. Thank you everybody for joining us. We had a good audience of 60 people, which is wonderful. And do look out for this presentation. And if you think you know contacts that would be interested in viewing it at a later date, look out for that YouTube channel. It will be published on there probably next week at some point. So I think without further ado, I'm going to draw this to a close and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.